brought everybody together. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from. The Knicks winning a championship meant more than anything else.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. Today, we have a love letter to the Knicks in Lower Manhattan after the team ended a 53-year NBA title drought. Plus, the Supreme Court limits the restrictions the government can place on the Second Amendment, and we look ahead to the big decisions still to come this term. Up first, though, the U.S. military has lifted its blockade on Iranian ports after more than 2 months. This is just a day after President Donald Trump and Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian officially signed the memorandum of understanding, which lays out the terms for ending the war and reopening the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump signed the MOU at a dinner at the Palace of Versailles late Wednesday night.
This was not easy, I can tell you.
But it's not over yet. We now head into 60 days of negotiations between the two countries. And in order for that to really work, it requires a lot of buy-in from other countries in the region. So how are Middle East nations responding to this potential deal, especially Israel? For that, I want to bring in Matt Bradley, international correspondent for NBC News, who's in Tel Aviv for us. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Yasmin.
Let's talk about Israel and Hezbollah first, because in this memorandum of understanding, literally in the first part of it, they talk about how the Israel-Lebanon war will end. That is wholly dependent on Israel and Hezbollah. I know that you spoke with an Israeli government official who said that Israel was not shown a copy of this MOU when President Trump said publicly that he had shared a draft with them. How are Israeli officials now responding to the points that have been laid out in this memorandum?
Yeah, well, it's been a pretty bright-eyed morning for a lot of Israeli officials to realize kind of what has gone on here and what the prime minister has been not hiding necessarily, but not revealing to the public. The fact is that the prime minister had nothing to do with the signing, nothing to do with the negotiations. And it's going to be very hard for Prime Minister Netanyahu to try to dance around it. Unlike President Trump and unlike Iranian leaders, we didn't hear this prime minister really trying to spin this into a victory. He didn't get up there and pretend that he had won. He got up there and gave a speech saying that this was a war out of necessity. This was a couple of nights ago. Gave a speech in Hebrew to the Israeli public. He took some questions from reporters, but he tried to present at the same time an almost impossible contradiction, that he is both standing up to President Trump and asserting Israel's interests and its security imperatives to the president, while at the same time that he has a fantastic relationship with this president. And the Israeli public, as well as the American public, can see that that's not true, that the president has come out and publicly humiliated Netanyahu, not just disgraced him politically with his actions, but is now denigrating him with his words, commenting on how Israel is little. These sorts of really insulting and denigrating terms.
What message does it send when you have a memorandum of understanding between the United States and Iran that says the war ends between Israel and Lebanon, and then you have the Israeli military releasing a map today which shows an expanded zone of control in southern Lebanon? What message is the IDF sending in that release?
I'm glad you asked the question that way, Yasmin, because you're right to point out what we're seeing again, an expansion of the Israeli presence in southern Lebanon. That is really going to be a sign to everybody involved that Israel is not backing down, is not going to be stepping away from the fight with Hezbollah, even if they're going to stick with the parameters. So maybe what we're seeing already, continuing fire by the Israelis and sometimes by Hezbollah, but it's contained in southern Lebanon. The thing that started this, that really broke the ceiling between a fight between Israel and Hezbollah and a conflict between the U.S. and Iran, is when the Israelis have fired into Beirut or when Hezbollah has fired into northern Israel. As long as the conflict stays within those bounds and doesn't exceed that geographical territory, then there's a possibility that this could just persist, the same level of low-level fire.
What about this $300 billion US dollars, this promise of investment? That is reliant on the Gulf nations, according to a senior U.S. official who spoke with NBC News, that this money is not coming directly from the United States, but in fact, it is coming from the Gulf nations. What are we hearing when it comes to this potential investment in Iran from these Gulf nations?
Well, for one thing, I can't imagine why the Gulf nations would want to pony up $300 billion to rebuild a country that, let's face it, Yasmin, could just be destroyed again tomorrow. Because the Israelis, again, are not necessarily part of this deal. They could decide to wake up, the Israelis, and to attack Iran on their own. And even though that's very unlikely, that would mean that all of that money going into rebuilding would just be destroyed again. Now, also, there's no commitments from any of the Gulf countries. We haven't heard of anybody saying they're going to put up the cash. There hasn't even been really any public expressions of interest, unlike there was with the situation in the Gaza Strip.
Which also hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, there's no money. The money hasn't gone there. The Board of Peace was supposed to attract more than $10 billion, well, more than $15 billion. None of that has actually come together. And recent reporting from the Financial Times shows there's $0 in the Board of Peace's account. So that makes it very unlikely that we're going to see, more of these countries committing to an even less likely prospect like rebuilding Iran than they would to Gaza.
Well, then you couple that with the sanctions being lifted on Iranian oil. So Iran could potentially start making money yesterday off of their Iranian oil exports. We know how much oil Iran actually has, so they could become a huge player on the stage. So why would these Gulf nations be on board with this deal when Iran now becomes a real competitor to them in oil distribution? And a stronger Iran just means less money for these Gulf countries. Is that at all being taken into account by these Gulf nations in this MOU?
When you're asking about the policies of the Gulf countries, well, there's different Gulf countries with different imperatives behind them. Oman, for example, which is mentioned in the MOU, one of the only other countries that's mentioned in the MOU, is mentioned in terms of possibly being able to make a deal with Iran about the future of controlling the Strait of Hormuz. That could be absurdly lucrative for the Omanis and very, very dangerous for everybody else. Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, all of them could be hemmed in by a deal between Oman and Iran, of which, again, they're not part of. So what we're seeing is not a bringing together of the Middle East in peace and harmony, but a fractionalizing of them.
Well, it's pitting them against each other, too.
Exactly. Each of these Gulf countries has, because of the fractured situation in the Gulf, they have kind of gone out on their own policies and own routes, trying to figure out what to do next, responding to their own geographic locations and their own economic needs. They're not united by a single will, which would normally be voiced by the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC. But now they're kind of all on their own.
Matt Bradley, thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin.
So the Supreme Court said today that the government cannot ban casual users of marijuana from owning firearms. The unanimous decision narrows a federal gun control measure that limits the restrictions the government can place on the Second Amendment right to bear arms. And the law in question is the same one that former President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, was convicted under in 2024 before his father pardoned him. So to talk about all this, I want to bring in Lawrence Hurley, senior Supreme Court reporter for NBC News, who was in the court this morning as this ruling came in. Hi, Lawrence.
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you. Tell me about this case and the court's decision today.
Yeah, it's an interesting case, right? Because it pits the government's interest in enforcing gun laws against the increasing legalization of marijuana, which is available in many states now. And the court here kind of pushed back on the federal government and its attempt to prosecute a man in Texas for possessing a firearm after he admitted that he was a casual user of marijuana. And the court said this federal law that bars users of illegal substances from owning firearms and it comes with a big penalty, up to 15 years in prison.
Wow.
Plus you're permanently barred from owning a firearm. They said that that law could not be used to prosecute the person in this case. So in the future, if the government wants to use this law, it's going to have to show that not just that the person uses drugs, but the person, is a serious threat to the public because of that. They didn't do that. They didn't even try to do that in this case. They just said this person has admitted he uses drugs and he has a gun, and that's it. And the court was saying that's not good enough.
So I think what's really interesting about this case as well is that this law in question, it would have applied to former President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden. With that in mind, would his conviction have been overturned now had he not been pardoned?
That's something I did ask a lawyer about this morning after the ruling. And that lawyer said maybe, or maybe not, because it very much depends on, not to talk about that case specifically, but just in general, it depends on whether that person is addicted, maybe the type of drug, if it's a type of drug that's associated with someone becoming violent or unstable. It's dependent on the drug. It's not just, well, you just occasionally use drugs. If you're like an addict, which I believe Hunter Biden has admitted that he was, and he was also using other drugs, maybe the case, comes out differently.
And the argument that can be made as to whether or not he was a threat to society in addition to being a drug user. We have been on pins and needles this June every time a Supreme Court decision drops because there are some major cases. You have got now Trump v. Barbara, the administration's effort to limit birthright citizenship. You've got Trump v. Cook and Trump v. Slaughter, which is whether he can fire members of independent agencies. You got two cases about transgender sports, transgender girls, and whether or not they can play on girls' school sports teams. And there's even more. Give us a sense, a preview of what else can be expected before the end of this Supreme Court session.
There's basically 16 different cases for them to decide, and maybe 3 or 4 ruling days. We don't actually know yet which days. Obviously, the birthright citizenship case about Trump's effort to limit the constitutional right to birthright citizenship is probably the closest watched one, but there's lots of other ones too, including, the Lisa Cook case about his attempt to fire a member of the Federal Reserve, which is something no president has ever tried to do. If the court were to allow that, it would kind of roil the markets and there'd be all kinds of repercussions. If the court says he can't, that's a significant setback for the president, the second one since the court already ruled against him on his effort to impose tariffs on imports from lots of different countries. And if he loses on the birthright citizenship case too, which most people expect, that would also be another significant defeat for the president. He's going to have some wins as well. There's a couple of other cases he's probably going to win on, but this end of term, we've got this conservative majority court that often rules in favor of the president, but this time around he may be looking at some losses. And as we saw with the tariffs case, he really isn't happy when he loses those cases.
So with that in mind and the major implications that could be coming from some of these decisions, and we talk specifically about birthright citizenship, where are we thinking the court is going to land on that decision, considering where they landed on tariffs, or if that all is any indication of where they'll go?
Yeah, I think there are some parallels with the tariffs case because both of them involve the president trying to do something unilaterally using his executive powers that hasn't been approved by Congress. And in the case of citizenship, it's laid out pretty clearly in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution that pretty much anyone born on U.S. soil is a citizen. And for the court to endorse the president rewriting that or reinterpreting it would be quite remarkable. And based on how the oral arguments went in April, the ones that Trump himself attended, it didn't look like the court was going to go that way. And Trump has been complaining about that ever since. So if the court rules against the president in this case, it's not, a big change in the law. It's just saying we're not allowing you, the president, to unilaterally change it without changing the Constitution or even Congress doing something. So, that wouldn't be a huge change. It would be a huge change if they were to say the president can go ahead with this executive order because it would have a dramatic impact all across the country.
Lawrence Hurley, I imagine we're going to talk to you again in the coming days as some of these decisions come down, and we continue to be on edge until they do.
Happy to do so.
Thank you, Lawrence Hurley.
Thanks a lot.
So the blocks around 30 Rockefeller Plaza were nearly deserted this morning. It felt like everyone in this city was in downtown Manhattan for the New York Knicks championship parade.
Let's go Knicks! Let's go Knicks!
Now, it's pretty rare for literally anything to be a first here in New York. But even with winning 2 rings back in the 70s, the last time they won, the city has never thrown the Knicks a ticker tape parade, a New York City tradition where instead of confetti, it's ribbons of paper like they used to use in the stock market. But it's even rare for an entire city to celebrate together.
Everybody's been waiting for this, right? Let's go, New York!
And that is what has made today so incredibly special. An estimated 2 million people decked out in their orange and blue, lining the parade route. And at the very end, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani presenting the team with keys to the city and then thanking them for bringing us all some much needed joy.
Over these past weeks, as the Knicks kept winning, our city has come together as one. Neighbors invited neighbors over. Strangers high-fived one another in the street. Subway conductors sang their announcements and bus drivers danced behind the wheel.
NBC News correspondent Sam Brock was in the crowd today.
How much pain would you say you've been through as a Knicks fan?
I would say probably more than my first heartbreak.
My friends, they used to call me delusional for continuing to be a Knicks fan throughout the years of losing. Some of them even switched teams. Some of them became LeBron fans. Some of them became San Antonio fans, OKC fans. Yeah, now
they all want to be Knicks fans.
They all want to be back in the house.
The unity, it's unbelievable. We're all New York, we're all Knicks fans, and this is amazing. And I think just the happiness you can see from everyone here.
Brought everybody together. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from. The Knicks winning a championship meant more than anything else.
And by the way, some fans are already looking to next season.
Are you confident the Knicks are going to win next year?
For sure, for sure. We're going back to back for sure.
Back to back, back to back, back to back.
Same time, same place next year, Knicks. No pressure. All right, that is going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard and you saw, press the subscribe button. We'll see you tomorrow.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.